I'm David Doorey, and I'm the Canadian content on this panel. So I'm going to add a little Canadian content and look at some of this in my 9 or 10 minutes that I have through a Canadian lens. But I want to just start by saying that, Isabel, thanks for having me. And also to start by noting that the manifesto, I think one of the most important things that it does, there's a lot of great ideas in the manifesto, a lot of great ideas in the book, and I recommend it to everybody. But I think one of the things that jumps out at me at a very base level is that it's a crucial reminder of historical lessons, right? It sort of begins with this idea and reminds us that, when the ILO was putting together the Declaration of Philadelphia and talking and promoting collective bargaining rights, they weren't doing it out of thin air. They were doing it after World War II with the idea that in order to avoid fascism and authoritarianism, we need to have strong collective bargaining, we need to have voice at work. And this audience will know that, but it's a good reminder at a time when we're seeing the seeds of fascism and authoritarianism rising again, incredibly, so soon after the war. So it's a much needed reminder to look at the lessons of history. And I think Isabel's concept of the labor investor as an equally important part of running a corporation along with the capital investor is also a very important idea that can help us imagine new frameworks for moving forward. And so there's so much to admire in the book and so many great ideas to absorb. And what I want to do in the short time I have is I want to focus in on one of the principles, the first one, democratizing work. And I think of the three principles that the manifesto gets at, this is the one that's most obviously closely linked to labor law, which is my field. One of the big contributions in the manifesto and in the book is this idea of a dual majority, the idea that capital and labor investors have an equal say in the running of a corporation, and that there's a veto, an effective veto for the labor investor on important corporate decisions. Now, obviously, that idea of labor investors, of a labor component on, say, a board of directors having a veto over important decisions would be a real shock to our long-standing business, the way we do things in the business world around the world, but in particular for my Canadian content, for the way we do things in Canada. It would be a shock to the system. Now, I'm coming at this again as a labor lawyer, and if I look across Canada, we can see crumbs in our legal system here and there of the sort of vision that's set out in the manifesto. And I'll give a few examples, but I could give more if I thought about it, and some of you in this room will know some as well. But so, for example, in our Canada Labor Code, we have a section in there that requires employers who are going to introduce tech change to advise the union and to engage in collective bargaining about tech change. So to give the union an opportunity to maybe bargain, maybe there's another way of doing things. Maybe instead of layoffs, we could do something else, or maybe we could give the people who are being laid off job rights in another way. In other words, we do have examples of where the law says if you're going to make a change that affects workers, you have to sit down and bargain about it. We have a few crumbs of that scattered across the country. We have examples of sectoral bargaining in different forms across the country, but it's a small section. And for the truth is, for most Canadian workers in the private sector, the odds of getting a union and collective bargaining is very small. Well, right now, we're hovering around 15% of private sector workers unionized in the country. And as things are going now, there's no reason to believe that's going to go up much, and it's probably going to go down, right? So for most Canadian workers, the idea of any collective bargaining is a pipe dream. Sectoral bargaining, is equally so. In business law, we do have a history, and Isabel talks about this in her chapter, like other countries do, of a legal requirement for boards of directors to make decisions that are prioritize shareholder value, shareholder primacy. We have that in Canada as well, although there has been a bit of a weakening of that in recent years. where, for example, the Canadian Business Corporations Act now says that while boards have to act in the best interest of a corporation, still what counts as the best interest of a corporation is now broader, and it specifically lists that the best interest of a corporation may include the best interest of employees, best interest of the environment. This is new, right? This has only come into effect in the last 5 years, I believe, right? So again, we have this creeping little crack where we are prepared to recognize sometimes in Canada that a corporation has objectives beyond shareholder value. But the truth is, it's largely a symbolic change. I mean, it's there. What it does is protects boards who go off on a whim and say, well, you know what, that's not good for the environment, so we're not going to approve it. It gives some protection to those directors, which is great, something. But the truth is, the law doesn't require the boards to consider these other things. And also, anyways, the board is still comprised largely of business people who have been trained and indoctrinated to think about shareholder primacy as their job. And I think this last point about being trained and to think a certain way is an important one. And I'm going to finish my thoughts talking about that idea of indoctrination and the way we understand the world. I think that to the pursuit of the manifesto in terms of putting it into practice will require a fundamental shift, not only in the way we think about work and capitalism, but also how we organize our legal thinking and how we organize our governments. And this is just a point going to the enormity of the challenge. And so right now, again, this crowd will appreciate this, but right now, labor law and the idea of worker voice and worker protection in terms of decisions at work is a topic we explore primarily in labor law classes and in social science courses that deal with labor studies. And in these sorts of environments, we tend to teach it and think about collective bargaining, collective voice at work as a positive thing, something that we should be pursuing and promoting. But that is not at all how collective bargaining and collective voice is thought outside of those narrow forums. It's not how we think. What was that? 5? 5 minutes. Okay. It's not how we think. It's not how, for instance, this school we're in right now probably thinks about collective voice at work, business schools, college programs. In the typical sort of business environment, the idea of collective voice and more collective voice is perceived as risk and something to be avoided. Quick plug to our paper tomorrow morning on what is human resources law with Ruth, right? So business perceives the idea of collective worker voice very differently than what this audience tends to. I'll give you just one quick example. My school at York University, the business school at my university, Schulich School of Business, every year is either the winner or in the top 3 of the leading schools in the world on corporate social responsibility. They don't have a single person on faculty that knows anything about collective. Well, that's right. They might know about collective bargaining, but their expertise is not labor law and collective bargaining. It's not part of what they do, and yet they are the world's leading school in corporate social responsibility. Labor is something other. Labor is a risk and a cost to be minimized. Government is organized along the same way of thinking. Again, so we have ministries of labor in Canada, and their job is to promote laws and rules that provide some protections to workers against the harshness of capital and labor markets. But the labor ministries are the little sister of the finance ministries and the business development ministries. And they're starved of resources. They have relatively little influence on the big policy questions. The province of Alberta, as some of you may know, just this week went one step further and eliminated the Ministry of Labor altogether. It's just gone. It's been rolled into the Ministry of Jobs and the Economy. Okay. So my point is, in the places where we think about decision-making in corporate boards and corporate decision-making, labor is not considered a partner at all. Strong worker voice and strengthening it is not even on the agenda. In fact, if anything, it's the other way. goes the other way. Now, this is probably an obvious observation for this crowd, but I think it's crucial to understanding the challenge. What we're talking about here is a fundamental reorganization of the way we think about the economy. And that's true for us as academics. We have to change the way that we teach courses. Right now, we teach labor issues in labor law in our own little silo over in the law school or in the labor studies program. But the manifesto, the way it paints the problem, is labor law is now corporate law. Right? Labor law is everything. Like everything is labor law. So that would mean a brand new subject, a brand new way of looking at these problems through a brand new ideological lens. And it won't be sufficient to just have labor law in a little silo over here talking about collective bargaining and everything else over in the business school ignoring collective bargaining. We're going to have to change the way we design academic programs. And if you move up from the academic world and you think about governments, we're going to need to think about the way in which our government departments and ministries are organized, because those of us who are kind of in the know in Canada, when we see the Alberta eliminate the Ministry of Labor, we see that as a bad thing for workers, just because we happen to know that the Alberta government is no friend of labor, right? They're a sort of Republican party, right? But maybe they're on to something, if in a larger sense of the challenge we're facing. Maybe in a world where we are pursuing the democratization of work, we don't really want a Ministry of Labor. What we want is a Ministry of decommodified work. And I think that's an important idea to think about, because if we had a Ministry of I'm just using it as a name, right? But a Ministry of decommodified work, what would that ministry do? What would be its agenda? And importantly, what areas of policy and law that have traditionally been in the ministries we think about now, labor, finance, environment, business development, what areas of policy does our new Ministry of decommodified work reach out and grab and bring in to think about this holistically? Because we can no longer just think of labor law as a labor relations statute that allows collective bargaining. We need to rethink how we organize the entire government. So that's the challenge, but I think it's important for us to talk about it.